Well, hey there, you're on the internet, this is how I spend my free time, and welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? But first, a bit of a disclaimer. I have tried to adjust the color balance on my camera because it did not want to show this ink in the actual color that it was. The ink in question is DeAtramentis Petrol, of which I only have a sample, and even still on screen it's coming out very green, when in fact it really does genuinely look like petrol, for those of you who have seen it, which by the way is not the same as gasoline. It's a very bluish green, and again in the chromatography it's looking not quite right, but I did my best without it being blatantly off colory kind of thing. Anyways, moving on. Here's the chromatography. As you can see, there's potential for something to kind of remain, and then it goes into sort of a green and a deeper green, with much of the blue staying sort of focused up at the top. And all the tests were done in this Hero 616 with a nib that I would say I aggressively smoothed, and therefore it became much more medium than fine. So there we go. Starting from the top down in density, Clairefontaine 90 grams per square meter. Now I hope some of the bluishness of this ink comes through, because it is a green, but it definitely has blue qualities to it, so I've affected the camera. But anyways, 9 seconds to dry. It was very wet. I've used this pen before, and the other inks were not quite as wet as this ink was in this pen at this time. So it makes me think that the ink itself is a little wet. And so considering 9 seconds to dry on this paper really isn't bad. I said there's decent shading, which I think there is if you look at the word considering. And it does kind of have a bit of a woolly texture, which I've noticed is quite common in, I'd say, most of the DeAtramentis inks I've used. Not too much echo potential because it's not a terribly dark ink. The water test isn't bad. It's fairly readable. Most of it's gone, admittedly. But what's there is pretty dark, and it didn't dye the paper too much. A little bit down here, but not terribly. Next is Rhodia 80 grams per square meter, where it again took 9 seconds to dry, and where I think the shading is actually even nicer, like brown or European. Yeah, still pretty wet flow, which I think is partly why there's so much shading, because in some parts it really was pretty dense. I like this pen, paper, and ink combo. The water test, again, fairly readable. It did dye the paper a little bit, which you might be able to see. But yeah, not too bad. We've definitely seen much worse. Next is Tomoe River, or Tomoe River, where it took 15 seconds to dry. Usually ink on Tomoe River is right about the same as it is on Clairefontaine, but here it did take a bit longer. And there's great shading, but even still, there's halo, which is sort of where it looks like there's a dark outline around the letters. And, knocked the camera. I'm not going to be able to get it on film, but all the eyes, all the dots at the top of the eyes, all across the page, have sheen. But just the dots of the eyes, and then like the super edges of like the scribbles and things. But yeah, anyways, water test, it's fairly light, but it's also fairly clear, and it didn't dye the paper that much, so here and there. Now, here's another disclaimer. I ran out of the usual 20-pound copier paper, and scroungers can't be choosers, so this stuff was liberated from my parents' copier, and they bought the stuff that you can buy at the pharmacy, and it is terrible. Dried almost instantly, but it bled and feathered, and all the shading is gone, and look at how it reacted to the water test. I mean, this almost looks like the chromatography paper. I mean, that is nasty. I mean, look at what it did with just the drops of water. This is unbelievably terrible paper. But yeah, so there's 20-pound copier paper, where when you get the really cheap stuff, it makes a real mess. In fact, Mead Notebook Paper might have arguably done a little bit better. Yeah, oh my god, that's embarrassing. Anyways, 2 seconds to dry, which really isn't too bad for this paper. But, I mean, look at this feathering. That's pretty bad. Ugh. Yeah, yeah, no, I really can't recommend this too much. But again, I mean, it was fairly wet in this pen, and it was medium-ish, so, Then lastly is Moleskin Notebook Paper, where it took 5 seconds to dry, which was really weird considering how quickly it absorbed. And you can see how quickly it must have absorbed because, wow, look at that feathering. I mean, it's every single letter, it's everywhere, it's intense, it's ugly, it's just nasty. Yeah, it did terribly on this paper. Again, it was kind of medium and it was kind of wet, but still, the fact that it is everywhere makes me think that just whatever it is in this ink chemically just does not agree with whatever the composition of this paper is. The water test was bad. So there you go. There's DeAtramentis Petrol, which I'm actually considering getting a bottle of. Yeah, I'm sorry that the genuine color didn't come through very well on the camera. Hopefully the filter is compensated for it somewhat. But yeah, so for your consideration from the Triple N Network, if you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching. Bye.